Before I even jump into what I wanted to say today, I just wanted to kind of reflect over the last couple of weeks, because just as Pastor Colin was saying just a second ago, we had Heart and Soul Sunday a couple of weeks ago, and one of the biggest things that spoke to me in that message was how it's the little moments that God has used in this house, in the life of the last 12 years to speak to people. But those little moments don't happen without the faithful obedience of people. And so even before I jump into the words today, I just wanted to honor our pastors for the way that they have been so obedient in carrying that message forward, in creating spaces just like this, in honoring God and being obedient to the vision he's placed on their lives, to create a space just like this today. They're in Florida right now. Last week they had the privilege of ministering to a church down there as well, and so we've been praying for them, we've been releasing them, and excited for all that God's been doing through them in the last couple of weeks as well. But I just wanted to take that moment and honor them, because they are honestly superstars. So, for real, though. And I actually just wanted to say, too, before I jump in, this message is very much inspired by the way they've interacted with my life. So I just want to frame that as well. I don't know why I almost got emotional already. This is not okay. This is, not okay. All right. We're going to jump right into Hebrews chapter 6, okay? Hebrews chapter 6 is where we're going to jump into this morning, in verse 13 to about 20, and then we'll break it down in a little bit. But it says this: "For when God made a promise to Abraham, since he had no one greater to swear by, he swore by himself, 'I will indeed bless you, and I will greatly multiply you.' And so after waiting patiently, Abraham obtained the promise. For people swear by something greater than themselves, and for them a confirming oath ends every dispute. But because God wanted to show his unchangeable purpose even more clearly to the heirs of the promise, he guaranteed it with an oath, so that through two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, he who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to seize the hope set before us. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain. Jesus has entered there on our behalf as a forerunner, because he has become a high priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek." There's a lot in there that we're going to unpack in just a second, but I'm just going to lay it out plain and simple this morning. The thing that we are talking about today is hope. We're talking about hope today, and I have two questions I plan on answering or discussing and stirring you around this morning as we talk about hope. Number one, what is our hope? Number two, what are we going to do about it? All right, so if you're taking notes, you can write those two questions down right off the bat, and hopefully that'll give us a container by which we have this conversation this morning. What is our hope, and what are we going to do about it? And here's the thing. Hope is one of those things that's a really interesting thing, because so often in culture, in our lives, we talk about hope. I hope this happens. I hope I get a good job. I hope I get a raise. I hope I hope my wife lets me eat McDonald's for dinner tonight. Speaking of McDonald's, don't bother trying the chicken Big Mac. It's not worth it. It was a waste of my time. But if I ever try it again, I'm going to ask for one chicken patty and one beef patty, and maybe, my hope is that will improve the flavor profile of the burger. Other than that, it's a waste of your time. My hopes were not met. But we talk about hope all the time. We throw the word hope around all the time, as if almost to say that we're actually just wishing for things. I wish this, I wish that. I wish my life would be better. I wish my life would improve. I wish this situation would go away. And so I believe that we have actually softened hope to be something that it is not. I'm going to define hope in just a second, but it reminds me of a story, because hope has to have a steadiness to it, right? And when I was a kid, I would go camping with my family every single year. And not just my immediate family. We did one of those things where camping trips happened to be this big family reunion, which is great. I love my family. My family is incredible. But when you're the oldest of the children that are there, and the other children are this tall, you are their favorite person, which has its pros and its cons, because at some point in time over the course of a 2.5-week camping trip where you don't even have a house or a room or a phone or anything to get away from them with, you need to find a way to get away from those little creatures. So I created this habit every single year. I would block off a time in my camping trips every single day where I, as a 13 or 14-year-old kid, would take my dad's canoe, jump in the canoe with a fishing rod, and pretend to catch fish so I didn't have to deal with the children. Has anybody ever done anything like this? No? Parents are not allowed to do this, but older cousins and siblings, you can do it. You're allowed. Okay, so I would do this, right? And we go to this same camping spot every single year. It was this tiny little camping ground with a tiny little lake, super calm, beautiful sunsets, not a ripple in the water. You just sit there peacefully, go nowhere. Until this one year we decided, hey, this campground is not big enough for us, for our family, so we're gonna go to a campground with a bigger lake. At this point in time, I was smart enough to escape the children, but not quite smart enough to deal with changing weather patterns and all that kind of stuff. And so my dad told me before I escaped from the children on my fishing trip, make sure that you remember to bring the anchor. I'm like, it's a canoe. A canoe doesn't need an anchor. What? I didn't even know we had an anchor. My dad's like, make sure you remember to bring the anchor. So I brought the anchor. It's a big, basically all it was a bowling ball on a string, but it would hold my canoe where it was supposed to be in his mind. And so I took the anchor, carried it all the way to the lake, jumped in the heavy canoe, because my dad's canoe was like 50 years old before they knew anything about making things lighter, apparently, and carried them both to the lake, jumped into my canoe, threw the fishing rod in, started paddling down the lake, went about 15 minutes away from the place, far enough away that you can't hear the cries of the children, threw a line in the water, threw the anchor in the water, and realized one thing very quickly. Anchors only work if you tie them to the boat. And so here I am as like a 13-year-old kid being like, well, I guess my dad's buying another anchor, no big deal, I'll just keep fishing. I fish for about 15 minutes, about 20 minutes, 30 minutes. All of a sudden, the sun starts to set. I'm like, oh, cool, I guess I should probably turn around. Sunset means kids go to bed. Everything's gonna be peaceful and calm. I can eat my s'mores in peace. So s'mores, gotta be s'mores. They're not s'mores, they're s'mores. S'mores, okay? So I turn around and I start to paddle. And that's when I finally looked up from like my fishing rod in the water to realize that where I was fishing before was way on the other side of the lake, because I had decided that the best place to fish was at the top of the lake where the current would by chance just drag me all the way down the other side of the lake. An anchor would have solved this problem, but I was too unintelligent to tie the anchor to anything, and so my anchor was also way over there on the other side of the lake at the bottom of a very deep lake. And so I started to paddle. S'mores are waiting for me. I'm very motivated, right? S'more. I want s'mores. And so I started to paddle and paddle. And what was a 15-minute journey to get to the spot where I was supposedly anchoring my boat, it was pitch black by the time I got back, because it took me 3.5 hours of my parents assuming that I had drowned in the bottom of the lake. The anchor had drowned in the bottom of the lake, but not me. And finally got back after 3 hours of paddling against a current that would not stop. And I was thinking about this story this week. I was thinking about anchors, I was thinking about s'mores, and I was thinking about that unique time in my history. Actually, it wasn't unique, but I'm not that smart, apparently. I was thinking about this ununique time in my history, and I kind of started to resonate with the feeling. I started to resonate with the feeling in the stories I hear while people talk to me throughout the week. I started to resonate with the feeling in the situations that a lot of people I've talked to over the last 2 months, 2 years, even since I stepped into jumping into ministry, all those conversations sometimes are marked with the same kind of feeling. You see, I talk to a lot of people, and maybe you're somebody in this room who's feeling this exact same thing, who's feeling that no matter how hard I try, no matter how hard I paddle, no matter how hard I try to get back to shore, it feels like I'm going nowhere. I remember that feeling distinctly, going, when is this ever going to end? When am I ever going to make progress? Why am I, every single time I take 2 paddle strokes, taking 3 paddle strokes backwards? And I've started to think about these 2 concepts of the feelings that we're navigating, the situations that are very real that we might be navigating, and the idea of our anchor. It says in Hebrews 6, and I picked this verse, and every time I land on a verse, I always think back to my Christian upbringing and think of all the pictures plastered on 90s Christian family homes' walls that say, we have this hope as an anchor, and it's this beautiful nautical bathroom. And so that's the feeling I get as soon as I think about this verse. But when we actually sink into what it means, I think it applies so deeply to where people are at today. We have this hope as an anchor for our souls. So I started to think about and dig into two things, hopes and anchors. Hope, like I was saying before, is different than a wish. I pulled up a definition, and I conglomerated a bunch of definitions. That's a big word that Colin taught me at one point. I don't even know if I used it right, but that's okay. But my definition for hope that I want to use today is this. It's confidence for the future based in the trust that we have in the enduring qualities or characteristics of someone or something. That was long. I know, I'm going to say it again. Hope is confidence for the future based on a trust in the enduring qualities or characteristics of someone or something. You see, if I hadn't dropped my anchor to the bottom of the lake, I would have been fine. Because I could trust the weight of the anchor to hold me where I was supposed to be. In that moment, I was trusting the anchor to hold me. I should have thought more about how that anchor was attached to me. But when we think about hope, often just throw it around as a wish. Hope needs an anchoring point. Hope and trust need an anchoring point. Back in, I think it was October of 2021, Pastor Colin preached an incredible message around hope that I'm going to riff off a bunch of points from because he claimed in that message that he ripped it off of somebody else. And so what comes around, goes around, and goes around, comes around. And so we're just going to do that this morning. But hope is something that we must put in something. Our society and our culture has places and spaces that it puts its hope. We, by nature, as people, have places and spaces that we unintentionally or intentionally put our hope. Some of those things that we've talked about before are money. We put our hope in our money, right? If I can only earn enough, I'll be able to have a confidence in the future, a stability in the future. Our health. If I can work out well enough, if I can maintain my health well enough, if I can stay away from McDonald's long enough, maybe in the future, my health will be stable. My life will be more stable than it is today. Other places that we often put our hope is our status. My status in the eyes of other people is a place that I can very easily navigate or migrate my hope to, right? If I could only achieve this sort of standing in their eyes, my life will be better. If only that person saw me, my life would change. If only my situation at work where I could get an advancement there or promotion there, or if only that person would stop talking smack about me, then my life would be different. Relationships. I hear this one a lot while I'm talking to youth and young adults where we're talking about, if only I found that perfect somebody, then my life would be smooth. Then my life would be everything I want it to be. Then I would start to be able to accomplish the things that I want to have. And then the last one I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into is just simply ourselves. I was reading this book this last week by an American sociologist. I was pointed to it by the great Tim Keller, also ripping off of Colin, because that's where he points me every time. But there's this sociologist by the name of Andrew Delbanco. Okay, he's this American sociologist who basically, in his book, laid out the relocation of hope in culture over the last couple hundred years in America and Canada. All right, so he's got this book and he's describing basically how since the birth of Canada and America, because we can apply Canada to it, it's very similar, hope has evolved from being located in certain things to something else. The first one he describes is God. We believe that our country was founded on Christian principles, right? A lot of the founding fathers of our nations, both America and Canada, pointed to the truths of the Bible to found our culture upon, and then we've seen secularization happen. So it migrated away from those things. The next one was humanity that he describes. And when he's talking about humanity, he's talking about the good of the human species. People started to dig into science and the ideas of how people were innately good. People were innately good, and we would progress in life to a point where there's more hope, there's more possibilities, there's more opportunities. And then things like World War I and World War II and the Great Depression and things like that happened after that, and people started to realize people aren't innately good. People don't have my best at heart. Governments don't necessarily represent me. And all of a sudden, he's left making this statement in this book. And it says this. It says, there is now no greater vision for life than the self. There's now no greater vision in life than the self. And I saw this represented in a less academic way when I was scrolling through Twitter this week, because I do that sometimes. Scrolling through Twitter, and I saw this tweet where somebody said, I have come to the conclusion that the only person I can trust in life is myself. And that's the problem, because I know that I am the only person in life that I should not trust. And yeah, that's, I think, where a lot of people end up. I can't trust anybody. I can't trust what people are going to do for me. I can't trust what people are going to say about me. I can't trust how people are going to support me. And so I'm on my own. I'm on my own to earn. I'm on my own to achieve. I'm on my own to make my own way. I'm on my own to protect me. It all comes back to this idea of self-protection. Another one I hear about all the time is self-actualization. If I can become more of myself, then my life will be better. Self-help, self-care, self-discovery, self-fulfillment. None of these things in and of themselves are bad things. I just think they're pretty weak places to anchor our hope. If I anchor my hope in myself, what happens when I myself fail? Where does my hope go from here? And if you look at the stats and the situations across our culture as a whole and our society as a whole, the stats tell a very similar story, where people are facing off with anxiety and depression more than they ever have throughout history, where people are facing off with a despair around the economy more and more, especially coming out of COVID, but increasing despair about the economy. There's people who, I hear this verbally to myself often, but also painted this picture across culture where people are afraid to have kids because I can't trust that the future is going to be bright enough for them. So people have this general despair, and it seems to say that what we thought would be working for us, it's not working at all. That's a cultural level, but also very much on the personal level, right? I faced off with this for my very self, where I was navigating a situation in my life where I was navigating mental health concerns. I was navigating these situations, and I felt more and more, as I got more and more depressed, I also felt more and more alone. And so as the struggles in my life increased, my supposed self-reliance also needed to increase. It's interesting how the devil uses the situations facing our lives to cause us to isolate, to cause us to try and strive in and amongst ourselves for the solution, to try and find a solution for ourselves, in ourselves, through ourselves, and when that inevitably fails, to leave us absolutely hopeless. Wow, this is a really, really dark message that I'm painting across the picture today. This is where I was going to input a Shrek quote, but I'll save it for later. So we have to look at our perception of hope, our anchoring points for hope, and the places that we have placed our hope, and go, there must be another way, right? And so what's the Christian definition of a hope? Or what is the difference in the Christian view of hope? What hope do we have in this place that people out there don't? What hope do I have because of Jesus that I didn't have before I met Jesus? I want to go back to this idea of self, okay? Because when I go back to those ideas of money, of success, of status, of all these different types of things, I start to think about those with one common denominator. It is self. And like I said, when I put my hope in myself to achieve, to crawl out of my situation, to strive my way out of a situation, I get to the end of myself and realize I can't do this anymore. The difference between the Christian hope is that our hope is not anchored in ourselves. Our hope is not anchored in our situations. Our hope is not anchored in the people around us or the people over us. Our hope is anchored in something immovable, unshakable, and unchangeable. Our hope is found in God. Romans 15, Paul describes a really simple way of saying this. He's praying for the people in the church in Rome, and he says this. He says, I pray that God, the source of all hope, will fill you completely with joy and peace because you trust in him. Then you will overflow with confident hope through the power of the Holy Spirit. You see, our culture and our society and our way of living, our natural way of living, seems to believe that we are the source of hope. At the end of the day, I can achieve my own hope. And yet, the Bible clearly lays out that our source of hope is actually in God alone. Why does that make a difference? I actually want to paint a picture of why that makes a difference. We've all been in a situation where we've put our hope in something and then it failed. The thing with hope is that it almost has a compounding effect, where if I put my hope in something and it fails, that thing comes back around and I'm feeling less hope. I'm experiencing less hope. We learn to have hopelessness as we put our hope in the wrong things over and over and over again. When we put our hope in things that can't change, that can't be taken away, obviously and evidently through God, our hope can't be taken from us. You see, God gives us a hope that can't be taken by situations in society. God gives us a hope that can't be taken through the situations that we face off with. God gives us a hope for this life and the life to come in heaven that cannot be taken away from us at a moment's notice. The things we often put our hope in, we achieve them and then somebody else can easily take them away. The hope that we put in God, we don't achieve. It's given to us and it can't be taken away. I want to let that settle in for a second. The hope we often turn to, we have to achieve, but it can be taken away at any given moment. And yet the hope that God gives us is given to us as a gift and can't be taken away at all. This is where hope and the gospel actually go hand in hand. They are in and of themselves the same thing. Jesus is described in the Bible as our living hope. And our living hope died so that we can have that hope. All right? And so what are some of the things that we can have hope in because of God, because of the unchangeable nature of God, because of who he is and the promises he has? That's where I actually want to go back to Hebrews 6, where it's talking about this idea of Abraham and the promises over Abraham, right? I'm going to go back to it. I'm going to swipe down to it. It says, "For when God made a promise to Abraham, since he had no one greater to swear by, he swore a promise to himself." The agreements that we make with God when we're trying to strive for hope and situations of hope are made between God and a person. I'm a person. I'm not perfect. And so the agreement in and of itself is going to be imperfect. We often do this all the time, though. Hey, God, if I do this, if I achieve this, then you'll give me this. That's an agreement that we often make in old covenant ways, right? The difference between the hope that we make of ourselves in that situation is that I can achieve that hope through my relationship with God, whereas the hope that God's actually talking about in Hebrews is an agreement he made between himself and himself. An agreement made between God himself as a perfect being and himself as a perfect being is a perfect agreement. Does that make sense? I think that's falling a little bit on dead ears. An agreement made between a perfect God and a perfect God in and itself must be perfect. That means it can be relied on. That means it's going to be stable. That means it's going to be trustworthy. And it means that we can put our hope stably in it. And so when we look at what can give us hope, we need to look at the promises of God. What are the promises of God that God has made between himself and himself? God in the Old Testament would cut a covenant between himself and people, right? That's the Old Testament, the old covenant way of doing promises, where God would say, if you do this, you'll be blessed. If you do this, you'll be blessed. If you don't do this, there'll be a curse. And that was the way the people of the Old Testament related to God. We live in a New Testament, a new covenant that says, if you do good, great. If you do bad, the sacrifice of Jesus covers it. Wait a second. Think about that for a second. We live in a situation where ourselves have been written out of the agreement. Ourselves have been written out of the agreement. And so perfection plus perfection equals perfection. It's what it is. I'm going to move on really quickly because I feel like I'm getting a little bit on a dead point. But the things that we can then put our hope in are the promises of God. Promises that God has made of himself, with himself, for us. Second one is the presence of God. The presence of God can't be taken away from us, no matter what situation we face, no matter what circumstances come after us, because God has promised, I will be there, and I cannot lie. It says in, I think it was, this verse just hit me while I was reading it. It's Hebrews 13, verse 5. It says, "Don't love money, be satisfied with what you have. For God has said, I will never fail you and I will never abandon you." He says, don't put your hope in money because I will never fail you and I will never abandon you. Which means we can have that confidence and that hope in God alone. His presence, his provision, and his protection. Not necessarily from things, but in them. Psalm 23 describes, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for" what? "You are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." Jeremiah 29:11 says, "I have plans to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you a hope and a future." We can depend on the promises, the presence, the protection, and the provision of God no matter what situation we're facing off with. Those are things that cannot be taken away from us because they are promises that God has made between himself and himself in the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. This is the third one that we can put our hope in. Because of the sacrifice of Jesus, heaven is our home. And so whether those promises come to pass here in this life or in heaven, when we put our hope in Jesus, we are promised salvation. We are promised life in heaven with him. We are promised redemption in heaven, right? And so we can face off with whatever situations we're facing off with here on earth because we have that hope in the future. And so we're left with this hope. And we really have to face off with this question of, are we going to anchor our hope in those things? Right? Are we going to anchor our hope in our own ability to achieve hope, or are we going to anchor our hope in who God is, what he's promised for us, and what he gives us freely that can't be taken away? Which brings us to the second question I have, because I feel like for a lot of us in this room, this kind of message can land on dead ears. It can kind of go like, yeah, I know I have hope. I know I can have hope in Jesus, right? Sunday school answer, where do I get my hope? It's Jesus. And I think about this a lot for myself. And I face off with this a lot for myself because I go, okay, it's great that we have a group of people in this room who have hope. And if you haven't come to know this hope yet, we want to keep walking that out with you. We want to give you an opportunity to meet Jesus later in the service. But for a lot of us, we can land in this situation of going, yep, cool, I got my hope. I've got my hope. I can live through my situations. I can live through my life. I can navigate whatever comes at me. I've got my hope in heaven. The craziest thing, Pastor Colin said this to me while we were in the office earlier this week. The craziest thing about the hope that we have is that God would give that hope to us, but then actually put his hope in us to bring that to others. I want to say that again. The craziest thing about this hope that we've been given, God would give us this hope freely, but then actually put his hope in us to bring that hope to others. You see, when we gather as a church, when we gather as a community, we're not just here to have a hope fest, to sit here and go, cool, I've got hope. Cool, I've got the love of Jesus. Cool, I've got all the things that God gives me. I can hold on to those promises. That is one of the reasons that we gather, but it's not the last stop, right? I was thinking about this last couple of weeks, and I shared this story on Wednesday to our team, but this really struck me because a couple of weeks ago, I was kind of scrolling through our church Instagram, checking in on some of the messages that came through. It was a Saturday morning, and I noticed this one message that came through. It was this message that all the words of the message said was, "Hey, can someone talk?" So I immediately responded and said, "Hey, my name's Dan. If you still want to talk, I'd love to talk." Within 10 seconds, I get a response. "Yep, here's my number, call me." So I pick up the phone and I start to talk to this guy. I really quickly realized that it's a 14-year-old boy, doesn't live in our city. I've never met him before. He's never stepped foot in our church. And he'd been going through a crazy, crazy mental health crisis. He actually told me that the day before he'd been on the phone with his friend who'd been going through a mental health crisis as well. And it just led him to a breaking point of freaking out, going, where do I turn? Where do I go? What hope is there left? And he picked up his phone. He opened Instagram. He typed in one word: church. This kid lives 9 hours away from us. Types in one word: church. So I'm talking to him, and I'm asking him some questions, kind of getting to know him a little bit. As we start to talk, I get to a point where I'm just like, hey man, I'm not a mental health counselor. I'm not a mental health professional, but I am a pastor. So I'd love to just sit and pray with you if you're cool with that. He He's like, yeah, I guess we could do that. I'm like, okay, he's hesitant. I'm like, okay. Hey, before we pray, do you believe in God? What do you mean? I don't know. Oh, okay, so I should probably explain this then, that why we're praying, what we're praying to, what we're praying about. And I had this opportunity where I got to just sit there and talk to him about Jesus, about the hope that we have. And it wasn't because I had run after him, but it was because he was so desperate for hope that he reached out to every church in the province, basically. He told me he reached out to 60 different churches, 70 different churches. He kept messaging people going, I need to talk to somebody. And the first place he turned, when he had nowhere else to turn, was the church. A situation like this makes me start to realize how desperate people are for hope. And it actually made me start to question myself going, why am I holding out? Why am I holding out on handing out hope to the people around me? Why would I keep my mouth shut in every conversation I have with people? Why would I not share every single opportunity I have the hope that I have? And so this week I've been literally dwelling on this thing again, this idea again. And yesterday even I was scrolling through the news. I'm seeing just different things. I work a lot with youth, right? So I always have an eye for youth stats and what's going on in the youth of our country. And I started to notice a couple things. Saw this study roll through my news feed, random Google News article, says 56% of high school girls in the States, all across the States, 56% have claimed that they have had sustained hopelessness over the last year. 56%. That's more than half. And then I saw another one pop up yesterday. Brand new article popped up in our city. It's a report by Ottawa Public Health that says 1 in 6 high school students have seriously contemplated taking their life in the last year. First off, I'm ridiculously moved by that because I was once there before I realized the hope that I have. But secondly, I started to wonder, like, why? Why would I stop myself from sharing hope? Why would I hesitate to share the hope that I have? And so I wanted to share a couple ideas that I really quickly ran through my head as I was wondering why sometimes we don't share the hope that we have. A couple of the different things that I wrote down. Number one, fear. Fear based in how it's going to impact my reputation or my opportunities, were two ideas that just popped into my mind. When I'm faced off with the opportunity of telling somebody about the hope that I have in Jesus, two things that roll into my mind. I've literally had this last week. I was sitting in a dentist office, sitting in a chair with a guy's hand down my throat. He asked me what I did on Sunday. And I'm going to be vulnerable a second. I, as a pastor who on a Monday morning who spent my entire day in church the day before, went, I worked yesterday. He goes, oh, cool. Next question. So what do you do for work? And in that moment, I'm given the opportunity to share who Jesus is. It's an open door to invitation, but a conversation about Jesus. And all I say is, I work with youth. And that moment has rattled me since then, because I'm like, wait a second, this dentist needs the hope I have too. This dentist needs me to hear the story about Jesus too. Why would I hold back? And I started to reflect on it and went, well, what's he going to think about me? Wait a second. I see this guy once every 9 months. Why does it matter what he thinks about me? But the other one that's been rolling around my head, and I'm going to get vulnerable again in a second, because one of the things I've been doing with youth is trying to get into a lot of the high schools and just bring the message of hope to them, right? If I can start a conversation over lunch with some people in a high school, then we can have a conversation about hope, we can have a conversation about who Jesus is, whatever that leads to. So a couple weeks ago, I was sitting at a basketball game, watching one of our students play basketball, and this teacher sits next to me, right? And I'm like, yes, strategy. I can have a conversation with him. I can get to know with him. Maybe this guy's going to be the open door of opportunity for me to plant my flag of who Jesus is in this school. And so we're talking about it, and that night was a Wednesday, so I shared about it at our team night, about this great conversation I had with this man who could be possibly a way for us to share more hope with more people. And I don't remember who it was on the front row, but they asked, did you invite him to church? And I stood here super awkwardly going, yeah, I guess that could have been a good idea. And again, this is one of those things that, not from a guilt place, but from like a, what was I even thinking kind of standpoint, has been rolling through my head the last little bit. And I remember all of a sudden the intentional thought process I had in that moment, where I was like, actually at a point where I could invite him to church as we're wrapping up the conversation. And in my head intentionally I went, yeah, but if I have this conversation with him and he wants nothing to do with church, it's going to close my door of opportunity to reach more people in this school. And I feel like God's just been talking to me to go like, who are you to decide who needs hope in a moment? Who are you to decide and hold out on people with the hope that I've placed inside of you, thinking that it's going to be your way of achieving some sort of situation on my behalf? And I've been thinking about this and talking about this with people throughout the last few weeks, going, what are some of the reasons that you don't necessarily share your faith at your school, or you don't necessarily share your faith in your workplace? One of the things that's come up is, who am I? Who am I to tell them what they should believe? Who am I to share who God is with them? Who am I to be the one that kind of implants my beliefs in their life? And I was sitting with that thought this week, and I genuinely just felt God say, yeah, but you could say the same about Jesus. Because with that mentality in mind, who was Jesus to step out of heaven and to earth to save me? Who was he? What right did Jesus have to come out of heaven to earth and tell me what I should believe and where I should find life? I was thinking about this, going like, what authority did he have? He had the authority of God. He had the authority of heaven. He had the authority of literally being our maker and our owner. But at the end of the day, when he left earth, what did he say? All authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, go. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them. You see, we can sit in a room like this and go, what's my authority to share my beliefs with other people? What are they going to think? How's it going to impact my opportunity? How's it going to impact the way they see me? How's it going to impact all of these different things? And then I just think back to the example of Jesus, who made himself of no reputation to step into our world, to give us the hope that we have. And so why would I hold back? Why would I base my life on my reputation when there's hope to be given to others? Another couple ones that I really want to jump onto quickly is an idea of just simple apathy. I think sometimes we as Christians like to remove ourselves from situations where we're going to be stirred towards compassion. Have you allowed yourself to be around people who need hope? Have you allowed yourself to be stirred with compassion because of the situations happening in people's lives? And this can be both situational. Are you just removing yourself from all opportunity of hurting? But it also can be conversational. How many of us will go through a conversation, and as soon as there's a hint of vulnerability, just steer the conversation away? We have people in our neighborhoods, on our streets, in our schools, in our classrooms, in all our different spheres of lives that are waiting for somebody to rub up against the reason they have no hope. We have so many people around us who will complain about their life situations, but not actually be complaining about their life situation. They're going, I desperately need something I can hold on to. I desperately need somebody I can talk to. I desperately need to be able to find some hope. When your neighbor is complaining about their dog, they're not just complaining about their dog. When the person in your class is talking about all the different work they've got to do, truthfully, I don't believe they're just complaining about all the different work they've got to do. They're looking for hope. And that's not me saying we need to all be people who stand up on street corners and start screaming at people about them needing Jesus, but what would it look like for you to be vulnerable and sacrifice your reputation for the hope that somebody else needs? Again, have we allowed ourselves to be around people who need the hope that we have? One last one that's just simple and bold and just out there, but it's obedience. At the end of the day, Jesus, the last thing he said to humanity while he was on earth, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father. And here's an interesting thing I've noticed, again, in myself and in others, but I think for a lot of the Christians in the room, the first few weeks or first few months that we know Jesus and we've put our hope in Jesus, we get super passionate about the people that we know who need to hear this thing. We get super passionate about all the different people that I know at school. This person's going to love this place. This person's going to love the community I've found. This person's going to love the hope that I've found. But as we grow more and more familiar with it, we don't see the point in it anymore or something. I don't know what it is. We just kind of go, yeah, okay, cool. They'll find their way to Jesus sometime. This took a tone that I didn't want it to take, but I just want to be kind of forthright. I talk to a lot of people who desperately need hope. I walk past a lot of people who desperately need hope, and that's something I want to work on for myself. But at the end of the day, my life is not about the places and spaces I can invade that might give me stability. My life is based on the stability I've already found in Jesus that I get to bring to other people. If you're waiting for somebody to ask you permission to tell them about your beliefs, can I just say something outright? That's like looking at somebody who's drowning in a pool and waiting for them to ask for a life rope. Let's just go for it, hey? Let's just go, hey, I have this hope. I have this hope as an anchor for my soul. Hold on to me, and I'll bring you to Jesus. But that takes vulnerability. That takes honesty. That takes us actually putting our hope in what God's given us to put our hope in. And again, I don't know. I think, I'll end on this. I think we often as a church, and I don't mean this to be correctional or anything like that. I just kind of mean it as my posture when I think about these things as well. I go, okay, cool, yeah, so what's the church going to do about it? Right? There's people who have mental health issues all around us. There's people navigating loss all around us. There's people who need support all around us. And so what's the great strategy we're going to come up with as a church to go and meet those needs? How are we going to, as the church, invade all these different places and spaces? But I love what we've been talking about the last little while, about who we are as a church, what the church actually is. And in Heart and Soul season, as we talk about really who we are as a church and what God has given his life for, how Jesus gave his life for to establish, first off, the church is plan A. You sitting in the seats around here are plan A. He didn't give a plan B. But it's not just church strategy that's going to change that. It's not just going to be church outreach that changes that. Because when I think about what the church actually is, it's you and it's me. We don't need new strategies to invade new spaces or find ourselves in new rooms or new opportunities, because I actually was sitting down this week and I saw a picture of this room. And when I looked across this room, I saw the different places and spaces we already invade. I saw a classroom. I literally saw one of our youth's face sitting in their classroom, and I went, hey, now there's hope there. Because they invade that space. And so when they invade that space intentionally with the hope of the gospel, there's hope in that place where people can anchor themselves on and not have to navigate things alone. I saw a picture of a doctor's office. I don't know who it was, but it was somebody in this room who's a doctor, where patients constantly come in with lack and with need and with sickness. And you might not be able to change their situation, but you can offer hope. You see, we don't need a new plan or strategy of how we're going to invade different spaces or places or areas or organizations. What would it look like for us to just start with simple obedience in the places that we've got? Simple intentionality in the places and spaces that we've got. I have the question asked of me pretty regularly, like, how do I discover my calling? How do I discover what God's placed me on this earth to do? I know it's a much larger conversation, but every single time I'm just kind of brought back to this simple thing. Go and make disciples. So wherever you are, whether it's a classroom, whether it's a sports field, whether it's a business, whether it's whatever it might be, how are you intentional about bringing hope and making disciples in those spaces? I kind of sense a bit of a somber vibe in the room. Here's the thing, though. We have the hope. I don't know why I had the picture of that commercial. What's in your wallet? Well, you have hope in your pocket. You have hope with you every single place that you go. What would it look like if we were just be intentional with it? How would it change the lives of people in the coffee shop? Pastor Julie was talking a couple weeks ago at one of our team things where she had a vision of just a fire burning in this room, which is incredible, yes. But then little fires burning outside of it because of it. In coffee shops, in grocery stores, in schools, in playgroups, all these different places, because what we come here to do is, yes, discover the hope that we have, but it's also to be resourced with that hope for others. It's to be stirred with hope for the others in our world. So here's what I actually wanted to end off by doing. I wanted to end off just by praying. I want to pray kind of a commissioning prayer for each and every one of us. Can we all stand up just across this room? How cool is it that God would choose you? How cool is it that God would choose you to be the unique voice, the unique person in the unique situation that you navigate? Whether it's Naomi running off to Ireland, we're going to miss you like crazy, or it's you going to your 9 to 5 tomorrow morning. What a privilege it is, hey? That God would, yes, gift us with hope in the form of Jesus, but that actually put his hope and his trust in us to carry that to others. Hey, God, thank you for every single person in this room. God, thank you for the unique voice that you've placed inside of them, the unique talents that you've placed on them, the unique situations that you've placed them in. God, thank you for the workplaces that we already are situated in, the school classrooms that you've already placed us in, whether by our choice or by yours, God. Thank you for the workplaces that might be frustrating us already, but God, you've placed us there not just for a job, but for hope. God, thank you that we can anchor our hope in you, in your provision, in your protection, in the way that you're with us in your presence every single day, God. And we don't want to be apathetic with that. We don't want to be hesitant with that. God, give us a boldness in this moment, God, to step into the places we already step with a new posture. A posture that says, I'm rooted and grounded in who Jesus is, and I'm ready to introduce people around me to that hope. God, I pray that this week we would be intentional with our actions, with our generosity, with the hope that we have in those things. God, I pray that you would use us to shine a light so bright that, yes, people can't hesitate but ask questions, but that in that moment where we have the opportunity, God, I pray that we would be bold with our words. In Romans, Paul talks all about how this idea of how will they know if nobody tells them? How will they hear if nobody preaches to them? Faith comes by hearing, and hearing the word of truth. God, we pray that we would be not just doers of your word, but we would be tellers of your word. That we would be inviters into what you're doing in this church. God, we'd be inviters into the hope that we have found in you. God, I pray that you would embolden us, stir us up, quicken our feet, God, to bring joy and hope and peace that we've found in you to the people in our world. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.